Before turning to our conversation, I'd just like to say a few words about why I think boosting educational attainment is so critical. As Jim was describing, I recently published this paper with Brookings that examines the causes of unemployment. And I found that the primary causes of short-term, year-to-year changes in unemployment were really due to industry demand and housing markets. And no surprise, we still have fewer jobs today than we did in 2007. Housing price declines have wiped away the wealth of millions of Americans. So this is a huge drag on the economy. But these are cyclical factors, and before, during, and throughout the recession, really the biggest predictor of unemployment rates at any given time is what I call the education gap, which is the mismatch in the supply of and demand for educated workers, and that's what my recent report focuses on. So in the 100 largest metropolitan areas, 43% of job openings require a bachelor's degree or higher, and that compares to 32% of the population age 25 and over that has a bachelor's degree or higher. So a pretty significant gap in terms of advertised online job requirements and what the workforce of the United States has. In the Washington, D.C. region, 49% of job openings require a bachelor's degree or higher, and that puts it third among all 100 large metro areas, behind only San Jose and San Francisco in terms of being places that require the most educated workers. Now, the good news for Washington is that it also has a very high rate of bachelor's degree attainment, as Jim was describing. And so overall, it has the fourth lowest education gap, and that's a big reason why unemployment in D.C. has been much lower than in other large metropolitan areas. And so, for the Washington area labor market to continue to succeed, it really has to maintain a high level of educational attainment. And part of that has been the inflow of workers from other parts of the country. And I do think this region could do more to grow its own highly skilled workforce locally. And certainly for those who today have little education, the opportunities are disproportionately small despite the relative prosperity of the region. So to put this in perspective, there were just 3 job openings in 2011 for every unemployed worker with a high school diploma or less. And this compared to 7 job openings for every unemployed worker with some college or an associate's degree, and 10 for unemployed workers with a bachelor's degree or higher. So a huge difference in opportunities for those workers to get back into the labor market. Now, one solution is to create more jobs for less educated workers. But those jobs are obviously going to pay a lot less, and the causality, I think, usually runs through the other way around, where when you have a high concentration of high-paying jobs, highly skilled workers, they create the opportunities for less educated workers by going out to restaurants, going to fitness clubs, and consuming the local economy. And so creating those jobs will really anchor the regional economy. I think the most meaningful solution is clearly to boost educational attainment. And to put this in perspective, from 1950 to 1980, the growth rate of workers attaining a bachelor's degree or higher in the United States was 5%. This actually dropped to 3% from 1980 to 2010. And during this time, we've seen a huge increase in the wage premium for college education, just as the supply has slowed down. And so this implies that the demand is outracing supply when it comes to education. And at the same time, inequality has gone up tremendously since 1980. And one of the problems in terms of explaining that slowdown, and there are a variety of complicated factors, no doubt, but one obvious explanation is that the cost of going to college has increased at a rate of 6% per year since 1980, which is double the rate of inflation, double the rate of median household income growth. So clearly, tuition assistance is an important solution to the problem of rising college education costs and the need to boost educational attainment. So, the question that I have, I think many researchers would have thinking about this is, well, is there evidence that these types of programs could work, that lowering the cost of college actually can provide a meaningful boost to educational attainment? And there's one very provocative study that suggests, not surprisingly, that the answer is overwhelmingly yes. If you look at the DC Public Tuition Assistance Program, which a UCLA public policy professor named Thomas Kane did recently in a paper, he found that the number of DC residents attending eligible schools doubled after a year after the implementation of this program, which, for those of you that don't know, allows DC residents to get a lower rate for public schools. They get to pay the in-state tuition rate, even if they go to Berkeley or University of Texas at Austin. So that is pretty strong evidence that lowering the cost of college, providing assistance, can be a huge boost to educational attainment. And so it's welcome news that many companies are offering this type of assistance, and I think it is critical to try to find ways to improve participation. So with that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to our panelists and have a discussion about all this. Today we are joined by two panelists who can provide some important insight from two different perspectives, one from the community college, one from the business sector. Let me start by introducing David Miles. David is the Senior Director of Learning and Development with Sodexo, which, as he was just described to me, is a major company with operating in over 80 countries and is really involved in just about every aspect of the economy. And he leads the performance improvement training, career development, and succession functions at Sodexo. He's a certified executive coach. He holds a BA in biology, an advanced degree in organizational development, and is a certified professional. He also volunteers regularly and provides pro bono consulting work, so I'd like to invite David to come up and have a seat here. And then our other panelist is Dr. Robert Templin, who I'm sure you all, many of you all know well. He's been the president of the Northern Virginia Community College since 2002. And for those of you that don't know, NOVA is, as it's called, is the largest institution of higher education in the state of Virginia. It has almost 80,000 students, I was surprised to learn, across 6 campuses. And much of that expansion has happened under Dr. Templin's leadership, and seems through partnerships with businesses, especially in fields like healthcare. Dr. Templin came to NOVA from the Marino Institute, where he served as a senior fellow and helped launch a venture philanthropy partners program, which provided youth serving organizations with money in the Washington area. And prior to that, he was head of economic development in the state of Virginia. He, amongst other accolades, he's also been named by Washingtonian Magazine as one of the Washington area's 150 most powerful people, so good guy to network with, definitely. So I'm pleased to be on the panel here with these two gentlemen. And let me just start by inviting both of them to discuss their initial impressions of this research and how it fits into their organizations. I'll start with Dr. Templin. One of the findings was that community colleges were one of the major recipients of the tuition assistance dollars, and maybe you could talk about why community colleges are a particularly compelling place for working students to go to boost their education.
Well, if you stop and think about, one of the curses of our region is that we have so many different political jurisdictions, and it tends to fractionalize our economic region. But if you pull it back together and take a look at, in effect, we have a system of community colleges that are serving over 200,000 people a year, and that they pretty much do the same things. They're located close to where people work and live. They offer courses on a flexible schedule year-round. Typically, at Nova, some of our classes start at 6 in the morning, go to 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. They're online, they're in regular classrooms. You can arrange to bring them to companies. So they tend to be very, very flexible. They tend to be adaptable to what the needs of the learners are. So at Nova, we have over 150 different degree programs, often matched with where the economy is or is going, and tends to be kind of pragmatic, applied learning rather than just theoretical, and because most of the students are average age 29 years old, so faculty are used to working with adults and have adult issues. In fact, most of our faculty are practicing professionals, not full-time faculty, practicing professionals. We bring in from the field, and so adult learners tend to relate more directly to answering the question, well, how can I use what you're talking about now in my job? And the cost is about half to a third of the cost of public universities, and substantially below that of for-profit institutions. So community colleges make a natural fit for this issue of tuition assistance. But I think neither the community colleges nor our companies have been as smart about deploying these resources as we could. And as we go along a little bit later, I'll explain why.
Okay, great. Well, David, I'm going to turn to you for your initial impressions. One question that I have is seeing the enormous participation of companies in tuition assistance is what's in it. I want to know what's in it for companies. And if employees can just take their education and go elsewhere, although there are restrictions, as we learned in many cases. But why does this make so much sense for companies?
One of my initial impressions after reviewing the findings were I was a little bit shocked that more organizations are not using tuition assistance programs as a lever to drive their business and to drive their employee engagement. I think organizations, we talked about return on investment in the findings. I think we in talent development and we in business have to allow for some redefining of how we measure success. Someone asked me about what are your finance people, what kind of questions they ask you in return on investment, and I says, I don't allow them to do that. I actually think we as employers have to create some return on expectations. Return on expectations, if we invest in our workforce this way, we're going to pull these levers. We are going to engage the employees to the extent that they apply discretionary effort. And when you start applying discretionary effort, profitability goes up. When you start getting employees talking positively about the organization and their experience with the organization, that drives customer service. It drives retention. And we even have put together some programs, it's called an alumni program, where I'm okay if you get an education, you go out in the world and you work a couple of years in another company, in another industry, I'll take you back. We stay in contact with those individuals, and we have to change our views that them going out and working for another organization and coming back is just more education, and I'm going to be benefited even more greater when I come back. So it's changing some of the parameters of, I give you $10, you need to give me $100 back, and you need to stay. I think we need to broaden the conversation around tuition reimbursement and development and partner more with the local community and those local community organizations that are supporting it.
Great. So I have another question for Dr. Templin. How do you, as president of community college, how do you make sure that the curriculum lines up to what employers are looking for?
Well, there are two different ways. We can work with employers directly to tailor an educational program to their specifications. So if they understand exactly what it is that they want, we can tailor it if they've got enough employees to justify the cost. But more typically, what we will do is we create clusters of advisory groups drawn from industry around a particular sector, and we sit down and talk to them. Yesterday, for example, I was with about 20 companies, and we were around the table talking about a field that doesn't even exist yet, that where the work being done doesn't have workers with a job title yet. And it's around an issue where this region could have an enormous competitive advantage. It's called big data. And so I was with the technology companies and the analytics companies, and we were talking about what are the skill sets that are required. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I recognized coming out of that is that while math, as we've traditionally taught it, continues to be very, very important for the technology careers that are out here, statistics is becoming ever more important. And we're not supplying that in our schools as a requirement. And so through those kinds of conversations, we gradually adapt our curriculum. Community colleges are notorious for having these hook-to-the-hip relationships with business and industry. And as a consequence, we can be very flexible and agile in what we do. It's pretty quick to change compared to more traditional university models.
Great, and to that point, David, can you tell us what sorts of skills Sodexo is looking for today, and how you try to anticipate, or what you anticipate the skills will be like over the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, we're in a strange time right now. Lots of things going on, and looking out 3, 4 years is. A few years ago, I felt very comfortable saying out in 5 years, this is the kind of skills we need. But it's getting cloudier out there. One of the things that we've actually started including in some of our competency models is intellectual agility. It's not this notion of you go and you get an education and you come into the workforce and you use that education throughout your career, throughout your job. It's this notion of you need to have a comfort with intellectual agility and become a constant learner and take on new concepts. And that's more of a pattern versus you can't teach somebody that. It's creating a system, working with local community colleges that make education attainable, that it's building upon itself over time. If somebody doesn't have a degree, I have a lot of employees that don't have degrees now. I'm okay if it takes you 3 or 4 years. Develop that intellectual agility, develop a relationship with your local community colleges to work towards that. And then the other one is doing business globally. The statistical notion. We have to be able to define what's going on, where, when, how, and what it means. We do business in 80 different countries right now, and I have frontline employees that have to give the same answer in Philadelphia that they're giving in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and in London at an account because the client demands it of us. That's pretty difficult to do. When somebody says, why aren't you emptying the trash can 3 times a day and you're only doing it twice a day, to get the same frontline employee to say it in Philadelphia, Sao Paulo, and London, that's not easy. So we have to have this agility and this creative thinking. It's not so much innovation, but this creative thinking. And then the other thing that I would say is this notion of constant, consistent development. Managers and employees can no longer afford to remain static in their knowledge base. They're going to very quickly become non-competitive, and they have to compete for jobs. We have to compete in the marketplace, and it's becoming increasingly competitive. So this notion of development, personal development, and personal growth is very important.
So let me build on that for a second. We've said that one of our competitive advantages that Jim said was that we have the most highly educated workforce in America. But we have another competitive edge that we're really leaving on the table. And that is we have the most diverse workforce And when you think about who lives here, folks from over 200 different countries, the majority of the growth of our region over the last 2 decades has been due to immigration. We have people that understand and are multilingual and understand cultures around the world, but they tend to be at the lower levels of our organizations. We don't recognize, this is what I mean about being smart about how we do our work. In terms of developing human capital, we can take that advantage of this multilingual, multicultural community that we've got and create a distinctive global competitive advantage here if we'll work at it. But it takes this kind of investment of companies in the lower levels of their organization to bring them up. It's been my experience, not borne out by the data here, but my experience that companies disproportionately use their tuition assistance and their professional development money on the 2 ends of the continuum. At executive management and what I'll call the screw-ups, the people that have drug problems and other issues, and the middle 60% of the workforce is okay, and it doesn't need to be fixed. And in fact, that's where our greatest return potential is. And so I think community colleges, universities, and companies could be a lot more intentional, much more strategic in how we deploy our resources in a time when Washington, especially as we're looking at government cutbacks, needs to define and leverage that competitive advantage.
David, could you tell us about what sorts of employees tend to use the tuition assistance program at Sodexo?
It's changed, and a lot of that has changed due to the policies we put in place and the way it's been administered. Several years ago, when I came into this position and took over the tuition reimbursement program, it was just that. It was used by the high-level executives or used to remediate issues. You've got to be aggressive in these things. And I just went to senior leadership and said, listen, you're a senior vice president. Don't be using the money that I need to use for the people. You put it in your budget. You have an easier time walking into the president saying, I need $2,500 to go take this workshop. Don't use my money. So changing some budgetary practices and then publicizing it and developing this relationship rather than it being submitting a form, yes or no, developing a relationship. I've now integrated it into the succession planning process. If you apply for tuition reimbursement, you're going to spend the time on the phone with someone on my staff who's going to work you through putting a development plan, documenting it so your boss knows about it, so your boss's boss knows about it, so I can see it. And starting that conversation and working with them, there are a lot of individuals, that big part of the middle of the workforce, who directionally don't really know where to go and how to start building their own education. They see a course, I want to go take this course. Well, how does that apply? Can we find you something else? So I've started developing a network of local colleges where people are going to these for-profit colleges, nothing wrong with those, but they're paying $4,000 for a course when I can get one literally down the block from you for half that price and probably get a better quality education. So it's just having those conversations and starting to shift the use of that tuition reimbursement by that middle portion of our population. That's a catch-22 situation because that's a lot more people. So here again, it calls on us in the industry to be really aggressive around protecting those budgets. If anybody's not using the tuition reimbursement, then send it to me because I'll send it. Every year consistently, since I've been in my role, I'm on track in probably another 2 or 3 years to double my tuition reimbursement spend. And every year I start running out of money towards the end of my fiscal year, and I call my president and say, I'm almost out of money. He says, isn't that great? Spend it. I have yet to deny someone for tuition reimbursement.
That's great.
And every year I've increased the budget. He says, remind me when we're doing budget reviews. So we have to be aggressive around it so that we can start to apply it towards this larger population.
And what sorts of fields are most people going into? Is it STEM, or is it international company, or the language training? Is that a big part of it?
There is some around language attainment, and as we look towards international mobility, language is a real problem. We've got this huge diverse workforce, but unfortunately they don't have the education to match the linguistic skills. So for them to start to compete for some of these international leadership positions, there's a gap there because they're competing against people who have the education. One of the things I'm starting to see are a lot of very specialized knowledge acquisition programs. For instance, certifications in some pretty sophisticated avenues, clinical technology machines, where they're working on these machines that cost $3 or $4 million. And then I'm thrilled to see that some of the policy changes we've made, lots of folks getting their GED. And if I see tuition reimbursement come across, and I routinely scan the approvals that we're making, the requests that are coming in, if I see somebody applying for their GED or for an introductory college course, I'm picking up the phone. We're having a conversation. We're going to get you through this. We're going to get it done for you, whatever it takes, because a lot of times that larger population, especially those immigrant populations, do not have a local support network. There's nobody calling to say, how's it going? You missed a class last night because you had to work over. Okay, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go to class tomorrow night. So it's really changing, and they're trying to be competitive, I think, is the biggest thing. But it's that direction and lack of direction around how they're competitive.
And Dr. Templin, in looking at your student body, what percentage roughly are going into a technical fields that require an associate's degree and versus those that are getting more kind of remedial stuff that they missed in high school but are crucial skills, whether it be English or math?
Well, they're actually the same student. So over half of the students that come to us are not ready for college level work. That's part of the scheme that needs to be fixed also, because that's our future coming directly out of high school, unprepared for higher level learning that's increasingly required by the economy we've got here. But I would say that nearly all of the students that are with us, I'd say 80% of the students that are with us are going for an associate degree with the intention of eventually getting a bachelor's degree. And they're preparing directly for work. It's not getting an education for the joy of learning, for the sake of learning itself, but because they think it will help them and their family land a job with a livable wage. But the other part that I'll mention is that, like the other community colleges, and unlike graduate schools and highly selective schools, 70% of our students are non-white. They are the future. They are the frontline workforce, either now or in the future, of this region. And they have an appetite for getting an education, but often lack the sophistication and skill of navigating the system. So to your point, if someone calls you and says, I'm going to take a course, they probably don't have a clue what they're doing. And they don't have an idea of how to create a coherent program so that they don't just accumulate credit, but they actually work toward an industry certification or a credential. So we need this teaming between companies and colleges, because we have the same goal, which is to skill up this workforce and leverage this competitive advantage we have.
And to build on that, I think we also need, as part of that partnership, I have individuals who do not have a degree. One person's coming to mind in particular right now who's recently led a nationwide project where it implemented a whole software platform that brings together 4 or 5 different systems and creates this operational platform that individuals can use to manage their business in a better way. He doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. So, but when I'm looking at the quality of work he's doing, it compares to someone who would have a bachelor's degree, almost in information technology. So we have to partner with these local community colleges to say, how can we transfer some of the experience into educational activities so that we're collaborating to get this person up to speed and so that they can get that credentialing after. So that's very, very important.
In other words, to take the skills that you acquire from experience and translate those into the classroom.
And typically there are holes. It's almost like Swiss cheese. Like Dr. Kimberlin said, you know, they've missed some basic component, but despite that, they've been successful all these years. And then the next thing you know, because of their performance, they get a promotion, and this hole in the Swiss cheese just falls in the right place and they're stuck. So it's really working with the local community colleges, the local universities, and with the employees as well as they're entering into the educational system to put together a plan that works.
So one of the barriers that we see, particularly for lower level employees, and I know that it's a business decision, but the fact is it is a distinctive deterrent, and that is the reimbursement policy requires the employee, who often is living from paycheck to paycheck, to upfront pay the tuition, and that is a significant disincentive. It's not because they don't want to do the work or that they can't do a good job. It's that they simply can't afford the outlay of money up front. And it advantages those in the company that have the discretionary income to be able to do that. And it perpetuates the system of those that already have get, and those that don't are left out.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. I wanted to, that flows nicely into what I'd like to conclude with before we turn it over to the audience for questions. And that's, what can we do? What are some policies to both encourage more tuition assistance, participation, and broadly to boost educational attainment? Maybe you can start, Dr. Templin, and then maybe you could give some of the business perspective on this. And it doesn't have to be policy. We're in DC. I'm at the Brookings Institute. I'm always thinking about what policy solutions are there. But the nice thing about this is that this is happening organically without congressional approval and gridlock getting in the way. So, maybe you could share some thoughts on it.
Well, I'll start by saying I think the notion of tuition reimbursement is an old concept, and that we need to upfront provide the incentives for employees to engage. And then if they don't perform, then they've lost the advantage or the benefit that they had. A second would be natural for our area, and we should look at other regions, and that is that, our employees work one place and live another place, often across jurisdictions, and the notion of in-state tuition is really a complication. We should create a set of policies that allow people who are employed here in the region to be able to take courses at any of our institutions at an in-state rate. And I think that, in effect, it would cancel each other out by the ebb and flow, but it would be the equivalent of requiring someone to pay a toll just because they're coming over the Potomac River or going into the city. It's a huge disincentive right now, and it's in everyone's interest that we incentivize.
Makes sense. Dave, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really struggling with that, because when we think about what we can do to make it better and make it more accessible, there are some quandaries. The fact of business is, I can't front someone not able to make the course or leave. That's a reality. It would not be responsible. But I have to believe that there's some way that we can bridge that barrier, whether it's setting up a local community foundation. It's almost the equivalent of a program to front someone, because that is a very real issue that breaks my heart every day, where I get a phone call from an employee that says, I can't afford this. I can't afford to front the money, go all semester, and give you my grade to get the money back. I just can't afford it. And it would take me a year to save up the money to take one course. So that's something that we do have to find a solution to. But honestly, I don't know
What if they could take loans subsidized from the federal government, and then your company could reimburse them for the cost of those loans, or make the interest payments for them, something to that effect?
Right, or partner in some way with some, we do so much work around stopping hunger in the U.S., and we have our foundation. There have been some incredibly creative things that have happened in local communities. And And I just have to believe that relying on public policy to be created, or like you said, gridlock to come into play, I have to believe that we can partner in this and figure it out and come up with some sort of creative notion. Because this workforce is hopefully going to be our next leadership team. And we've got to figure it out. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble pretty soon. I'm seeing increasing numbers of our leadership team. Talk about the baby boomers. Well, it's becoming reality. They're leaving. And I'm looking down at my frontline population and I'm going, I got to get them from there to here some way, somehow. So we've got to figure it out some way, very creatively, because our traditional avenues just aren't going to work anymore.
All right, well, lots to think about. Let me turn it over to the audience here for some questions. Yes?
Hi, my name's Iris Woodard, and I have arthritis. I'm the Workforce Development Coordinator for Kaiser Permanente in this region, and we do a lot for our employees. We have tuition, prepaid tuition, forgivable loans, career coaching to help them direct. We have even created a wage replacement stipend. Not all the classes that are offered, these are working adults with families, not all the classes are on evenings and weekends. And we continually bump up against, how do I get work time to go to some of these daytime classes? I can't solve that problem. I don't know what to do. So if you have any suggestions about releasing work time.
Well, one of the alternatives that we need to encourage is the online option, particularly if you're missing, if you can't get 80% of what you need, it's not available at the time. I understand, but if it's a matter of plugging in some gaps, at Nova we have 22,000 students online, and I know the other community colleges similarly have online learning options. So I think that's one of the ways. Another way, particularly for large organizations like Kaiser, is if you've got a concentration of employees who we can treat as a cohort, we can come to you and help do that. So that's another way, but it is right, particularly, I mean, it's usually not just a matter of how do I get released, but, traffic around here is so horrible that even getting to class on time is a real difficult challenge.
Well, especially when you're talking about the healthcare professions that often require clinical practicums as well. It's the clinical practicums that are all during the day.
And I think too, as employers, we have to think outside the box. And that term's thrown out there a lot, but at least half a dozen times a year, I'm conducting intervention with the boss to call up and say, hey, can we work around this? Can we put some flex time in place for a short period of time for this employee? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? I've yet to find a situation that I couldn't find a cure around. It just takes work, and it takes being creative.
Another option, particularly again for large organizations, is that I was just thinking about the clinical requirement. If I were going to think about where could I do clinical experiences, I would, hey, how about Kaiser? I mean, you've got some of the largest clinical resources around.
Yes.
And so the kinds of partnerships that we can develop with community colleges, maybe not universities, but there's no reason why we can't team with you in designing learning experiences using your own resources, including your own staff as teachers if needed, to create and accredit and certify what it is that they're doing there on the job. So to your point of being able to integrate, I mean, people are learning on the job all the time. They're picking up knowledge and skills. The problem is there's no way to credential that.
Right.
But if we intentionally work together, we could do that. And I don't think we're doing enough of that.
No.
Martha Ross.
Hi, I'm Martha with Brookings. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
And I have a question for Dr. Templin. Have you seen patterns in the kinds of credentials and degrees that are most in demand in this region? What students are wanting to get that's supported by employers? And then what sorts of institutional changes do you think community colleges need to make internally to be smarter about deploying these assets, as you said?
Really good questions. Well, Yes, there is a huge mismatch between particularly what young people coming out of high school think they want to do and what the market requirements are. So I'll give you an example. In just Northern Virginia, we know from a study that we did with Mason's Center for Regional Economy that over the next 10 years, we're going to see 600,000 job vacancies in Northern Virginia, half due to economic expansion, half due to the baby boomers retiring. 80% of those are in one sector. It's in science, technology, and professional services. And a big chunk of what remains is in healthcare. So we're looking in science and technology and healthcare as being where the market is heading. And yet, the largest single program for enrollment is psychology. And so we have a lot of folks that are starting college without a clue about what the market requires. And so this also requires a new relationship between business and industry and education. And we're trying to launch this in Northern Virginia. You can't, for these careers, you can't wait until you're graduating from high school to come out and say, hey, what do I think I want to take in college? And you say, I think I'd like to be an engineer. And you look at what your math and science background is, and you're not prepared. And so, and probably you're not going to say, I want to go into engineering, because engineering is for nerds and it's not cool and I don't want to do that. And so we've got to make these fields first known and cool and rewarding, starting in the elementary school. And so, but teachers aren't going to do this alone. It takes the engagement of companies. And so we've created a pilot where we've got 8 companies together, and they send teams into elementary schools, and they teach a lesson hands-on that's to the standards of learning that students need. And then we have robotics competitions and summer camps, and then internships that help young people understand what the careers of the future are. If we don't make that investment, we're going to have this giant mismatch that will require hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to rework, because when they come out and they realize that they don't have the skills for the workforce, they have to go back to school again. One of our largest groups that we have at Nova are people with liberal arts degrees who are coming for skills training. And so anyway, so that's the first one. We have this huge information mismatch in preparation. And often it's among the populations that have no one in the family to guide them. So, then the second piece of how we could be smarter in deploying the assets that we have. I think we need to leverage resources beyond our institutions. I know it sounds abstract, but we lose a lot of people anytime there's a transition in their lives. So a transition from the military back to the economy, we go through huge inefficiencies. Anytime there's a transition from high school to college, from college to the workplace, we have these huge inefficiencies. And so there are a lot of us that are doing things with similar goals in mind, but we all stay inside our organizational boundaries. So I'm going to give an example of how we can break that down. We've got some colleagues here from Goodwill Industries. Goodwill Industries works in low-income communities across the nation and is the largest not-for-profit training provider in the United States. And we all know about the Goodwill stores, but we really don't recognize the skill training that they do for employment. And they do a wonderful job. The difficulty is that giving a person an entry-level job and having them keep that job in advance are two different things. And so their experience has been, we get them a job, the economy tanks, they're the first to get laid off, and we're right back here again with unemployed people. So what if those organizations teamed with community colleges, and the training that Goodwill does is recognized for what it is that's being learned, and the students in their program are given academic credit toward a degree and a pathway to complete that degree once they're employed. We could improve the equation for everybody if we could learn to cross boundaries between organizations. We just don't do that. I'll give you one that's a no-brainer that we've made some improvement in, but we have a long way to go. When you go from a community college to a university, you may lose part of the program you studied at the community college and take another year to complete your degree at the university. That's very wasteful of public resources and of student information resources. There is no excuse why that would happen, or should happen. I'll give you some other examples. You know, the cost of higher education is out of sight. The senior year of most high school is a wasteland. Most high school seniors have 2 courses that they have to complete, government and English. And so then you have to stay the full day if they don't want to. Why don't we challenge our young people to do college level learning in the senior year, get the first year of college out of the way while they're still in high school at no cost to the parents, and then accelerate their learning to complete the bachelor's degree in 2 years or less? Well, those are some of the examples.
Yes.
Good morning, Eric Selznow with the National Skills Coalition. Very interesting conversation. You may have answered my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So this is great to see this study and this conversation about business investment in their own workers, increasing their competitiveness, growing and all that. They have skin in the game, and that's great. What is the role, is there a role, or what is the role, or should be the role of public policy or the public sector in incumbent worker training to help and support the upskilling, particularly of low-wage workers? So local government policy, workforce or economic development, state government policy, or federal investment in incumbent worker training. Is that something that the public sector should be involved in, or should we leave it all to the civic sector?
Good question. I think, let's figure that one out. I think a lot of that will depend on the economy at the time, and here's the reason I say that. There are times when I have what I would call wiggle room to do some things, and then there are times that I don't. We as an organization have always, and I realize, I've been with Sodexo 15 years, and I'm quite often the most junior person in a room, because we have such a broad spectrum of roles that you can take in the organization and opportunities. But one of the things, policies that we have adopted is even in times of economic downturn, when our business gets really tough and those margins get even thinner, from senior leadership, it's now is the time to really invest in your people while you've got time on your hands. You're not seeing 5,000 customers a day, you're seeing 3,000. That extra time invested in your people. So I think there needs to be some mechanism for business and the public sector to work together on this ebb and flow of the economy and be flexible and agile is the big thing. When the economy gets tough, that's when people start cutting back rather than being creative, and the public and private sector starting to work together and say, how can we utilize some of the excess? I've got senior vice presidents on staff who are trying to fix it. Why can't I get them out into some of the public schools and the community colleges to talk about careers and mentor some high school students to make sure they do go to college and make sure they are preparing broadly for a career in the future? So how can we create this transparency between business and the educational system and the community foundations? We do a lot of subcontracting with Goodwill and some other organizations, bringing in frontline employees, and it's difficult. I think we need to blur the lines between religious institutions, between educational institutions, and community foundations, and not have such hard fixed lines and say, this is your space, and I don't do this. Ambiguous answer, but it's a tough one.
Dr. Tevlin, did you want to weigh in with
I'm
any
not
policy
chance.
or- We got another question.
Good morning, my name is Steve Wing, I'm the president of Wings, Workforce Innovations for Navigating Global Solutions, and I retired from CBS a few years ago, and so the healthcare industry is important, but I want to commend you both for what you're doing. We're out in Cleveland, we're working on a project with Lakeland Community College, and we wanted to get a number of businesses to help bring like TANF folks in to get them employed, and we needed some money from the businesses to help put this this class together. Couldn't get them to do it until we talked about tuition reimbursement, and then figured out that let's use your tuition reimbursement money to help put this together. We got like 70 or 80 folks that are in that program, and there's 5 or 6 companies that, you know, probably never would have heard of that before. So I think here in Washington, I mean, there is 2 extremes. And if you look in, you know, Ward 8 and, you know, Anacostia and the high school down there, I mean, they're hurting. And so I think those kind of programs and things that you're doing, I really commend you for what you're doing. Same thing with Eric over here too.
Yes, question here?
Yeah, well, I have a response to Eric Sells.
Well, I was actually asking you the long way.
Okay. I'm Charlene Dukes, and I'm the president of Prince George's Community College. And when you ask about either state or federal policy or certainly what organizations can do, I think one of the things that Dr. Templin and Mr. Miles have spoken to is the whole need for resources to support people going through these programs. And we, quite frankly, in this country operate from a very traditional model of providing federal or state scholarship aid. And that is, if you are enrolled in credit courses, pursuing, we hope, an associate degree or a credit certificate or beyond, then you are eligible for some sort of aid. If you are in short-term training programs that are workforce development focused, and they are sort of get you in, get you trained, get you out, there are no resources to support that kind of individual. And we've all been saying, not only this morning, but in other environments as well, that students individuals will need more than a high school diploma, but in some cases, less than a bachelor's degree or associate's degree. But we don't support that kind of training with any kind of finances. So I think that those are policy issues, that we're operating the Pell program from the same model in which it was operated when it was first established. And the world has changed.
Right.
We have agreement up here, and we'll time for one more question.
Oh, well, actually, my question
Comment.
dovetails. Well, I'm an adult learner myself, and there's, you know, I've gone back to graduate school, and this issue of paying up front is tremendous. And if you only take one course, and maybe I'm not reading the federal student aid rules right, but you don't qualify for federal aid if you just take one course a
You're reading
semester.
them, exactly.
Okay. Which has been an impediment even to someone like myself who makes a decent salary, but, you know, I go to University of Maryland, it's at $3,000 for 3 credit hours. It's just a tremendous barrier. And so I was wondering, Dr. Templin, how many students at Nova take advantage of federal aid? Because I imagine there are a lot of students who are taking one course. And then to Mr. Miles, like how many of your people at Sodexo, you were talking about this issue about loans. I mean, I imagine one of the public policy areas that could be changed is the rules around federal student aid and allowing people who take one course to qualify.
We have about 25% of our students that are on federal subsidized. And there's probably another 20% that take advantage of subsidized loans. But you're absolutely right, for the adult learner who's taking just one course, there's relatively little there, except for the tuition assistance programs that our employers have. And so where you find adult learners having any kind of assistance is through their employer. And my hope is that our employer community and our higher education community would come together and publicize the fact that we've got these benefits that are available to folks. If you don't know about it where you work, you should make an inquiry about using them. But it is a deterrent.
But is there any conversation about, and why shouldn't you be able to qualify for federal aid if you only take one? Why do you need 2 courses?
Because of the cost of the federal government.
Okay.
And if you already have a bachelor's degree, you don't qualify for Pell Grants anyway. And it never matters if you've never received a Pell Grant in your undergraduate education. You do not qualify.
And I'll share with you, 8% of my folks, that's an interesting, that you bring this up. 8% of my folks that are making requests for tuition reimbursement are taking more than one class. 92% of them are taking a single course at a time, so therefore would not qualify.
Well, I think we're out of time, but yeah, it sounds like we've got some good policy agenda ideas coming out of this. It's really interesting research. I'm happy to be, I was happy to be part of the conversation here. I don't know if anyone else wanted to say some final words, Sarah. Do you want to?
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Sarah Olmixon of the Community Foundation. We're really thrilled to have this research out and look forward to continuing the conversation that we believe that this publication has helped us start. I want to say a special thanks to Kyle and Ben and Bill Browning. Kyle's with the Board of Trade, Ben is with me at the Community Foundation, and Bill Browning is at NOVA. They've really been very instrumental to driving the planning for this particular event and for this paper, and I just want to say a word of thanks to them for managing all the very complex logistics, as well as Ranjani on our staff. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.